And it's just, flying all over the place. This one is, I've probably gotten 30 copies of this, mostly from the usual right-wing sources. This is going out to the same people who are getting the Obama doesn't have a birth certificate crowd. I'm on everybody's mailing list. Your Marxist eugenics government plans to immunize your brain while ruining your immune system. Please read the following by Richard Moore, investigative reporter. And some worry that the swine flu shot could be more dangerous than the disease. That's the subtitle. And it pretty much says the whole thing, so I need not read to you from it. Here's another one. This is actually a scientific paper that was published, Pneumonia and Respiratory Failure from Swine Origin Influenza A, H1N1. And it talks about, some of the very serious problems that come from this swine flu virus. In other words, be afraid. Not necessarily be afraid. I mean, this is just science, but it's like maybe there's a legitimate concern here. Then here's another headline. Sebalia says it'll be Thanksgiving before the majority of Americans are fully immunized against H1N1. Reality probably much later than that, and the flu season precedes that. Here's another one. This Maria Cheng with the Associated Press. The headline, half of health workers reject swine flu shot. Now, this was actually in Hong Kong. About half of Hong Kong's health workers would refuse the swine flu vaccine, new research says, a trend that experts say would likely apply worldwide. And, of course, the big headline that was on the right-wing websites was half of health workers reject swine flu shot. And that's actually an Associated Press story. This isn't, a right-wing cranks story. Here's another one, Mike Cohen writing, U.S. media silent on swine flu vaccine linked to nerve disorders, specifically Guillain-Barré syndrome, if I'm pronouncing that right, which we had in the past. What happened in 1976? 25 people died because the government gave vaccine to 40 million people. Those 25 died not from the swine flu, but from the vaccine. And finally, U.S. media silent on swine flu vaccine. Well, that's the same thing. So we thought, okay, there is mass confusion out here. There's general craziness. There's 1,000 different stories flying in 16 different directions. Let's get on somebody who, we've talked to before. I've read her work. I've read at least one of her books. I read The Coming Plague several years ago, Newly Emerging Diseases in a World Out of Balance, her newest book, Betrayal of Trust, The Collapse of Global Public Health. She is the senior fellow and for the Global Health Program at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is CFR.org. She is the only writer to have ever been awarded all three major journalism awards, the Peabody, the Polk twice, and the Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Prize best-selling author, and as I said, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations about global health, Larrie Garrett. Larrie Garrett, welcome to the show.
Hi.
You know your stuff. I trust you. What's going on here?
Well, first of all, let's remind everybody that vaccination is voluntary, and that if you are afraid of it or you think the government is evil, you can opt out. Nobody's going to make you at gunpoint get a vaccine.
Well, isn't there a suggestion that all school children should be involuntarily vaccinated?
Somebody may have suggested it, but they're not in the government. It's not anything anybody officially is suggesting, nor would we even have the capacity to do it. We won't have enough vaccine in any near term to do such a thing.
Okay, so that's a right-wing paranoia that I'm seeing all over the
not on the radar screen.
Okay.
And then let's go to a couple of the allegations being made. First of all, many people are of the belief that vaccines generally are dangerous. So they fall in one box, and that's a box that says, I don't care what it's for, measles, polio, pertussis, hepatitis, whatever, I'm against it. Right. Okay, put them over there. They've got their belief system. It is not, and I repeat, not grounded in solid science. Yeah. The second group...
Although there have been some times in the past, particularly 30, 40, 50 years ago, when vaccines were kind of dicey, or there have been a few occasions when they were, but the modern day vaccines are relatively safe, particularly for an adult.
Absolutely. I mean, I think clearly there are manufacturers that are sloppier than other manufacturers. There are classic examples of vaccines in the past. We can all think of the Cutter incident way back in the Salk-Sabin polio vaccine days. Mm-hmm. But these are not things that, by and large, ought to be troubling people. Okay, then the next category of resistance has to do with the idea that because in 1976 with the swine flu fiasco, a couple of dozen people developed Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Thank you for the pronunciation.
That all flu vaccines are, by definition, somehow dangerous. And this comes up every single year, even with seasonal vaccination. And there certainly are people who refuse on principle, with the firm belief that it's somehow dangerous to them, to get vaccinated seasonally. Mm-hmm. That is their prerogative. And it's their prerogative to refuse this one as well.
Right. Well, what is Guillain-Barré syndrome, and why was it associated with the swine flu vaccine back in '76, and why would it not be, or is it potentially associated with this one?
The swine flu vaccine in '76 was made in great haste and using technologies that have been improved since then. Mm-hmm. And Guillain-Barré syndrome is a very unusual immunological syndrome where your immune system starts to attack your own neurological system, and people had neurological disorders, and in a handful of cases it was lethal. The ultimate lawsuit tab against the federal government, because you may remember, Tom, back then, Gerald Ford, the Republican president at the time, told Congress we were facing a dire situation and that Congress should absorb all liability. Mm-hmm. That will never happen again, by the way, because of what happened in that case.
But hasn't Congress already said that vaccine manufacturers cannot be held liable?
They've said that manufacturers cannot be held liable, but they haven't said, and therefore you can sue the government.
So there's nobody you can sue.
Well,
I'm
not
sure.
Like
a good thing.
I'm not an expert on the legal aspect.
Okay.
I'll have to ask somebody else about that.
All right.
But
the bottom line is that Guillain-Barré, how do you say it again?
Guillain-Barré.
Guillain-Barré is not something that has been popping up with frequency in the last decade or so around vaccines. Is that an accurate statement?
That is accurate, and it's also accurate to say that the original allegations of the scope of the Guillain-Barré syndrome problem were greatly inflated because of that legal apparatus, and so you had sort of every lawyer in licking his chops over.
Right. Have you been harmed by the vaccine? Call 1-800.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And people did. And well over $1 billion worth of lawsuits were filed. But ultimately, many years down the road, it took more than a decade for all these cases to wend their way through the federal courts. In the end, only a handful of payouts were made.
Okay. So I guess the carry-home message here is, number one, don't worry about the vaccine. Number two, the flu, this swine flu that's coming, while it is not the Spanish flu of 1918, 1919, it is more virulent than a normal flu. How seriously should we be taking this, and should the average person go out of their way to get vaccinated this year?
So in trying to assess what this H1N1 swine flu really means, I look at it on a couple of levels at the same time.
And we have about a minute and a half.
Oh, okay. Well, then the bottom line, if we only have a minute and a half, is to say you should take it seriously but not be panicked. You should follow your public health authorities' best advice on what to do, and you should be especially concerned about young adults and adolescents because they appear to be at highest risk. Because
their immune systems are the strongest, and what gets you sick with a virus is your immune system's response to that virus, not the virus itself.
That is true, but we also think that people who are older may have been exposed to a virus that offered some similarity, and therefore you're slightly immune.
So that's older than, what, 50, older than 60, older than 70?
You had to have been infected before 1957.
So if you were born before 57 and there's any possibility you had the flu back then, you might not have a problem with this flu.
Maybe.
Okay. Very, very interesting. And we're looking at, they're predicting 90,000 deaths in the United States. Typically we have around 36,000 deaths a year.
Yeah.
So this is not going to knock down millions of us like the Spanish flu did.
The biggest risk right now in the short term, assuming the virus does not mutate and change in any way and remains a relatively mild virus, is that because it appears to be so incredibly contagious, more so than routine flu, we could have a huge surge of cases happening all across the country in roughly the same 6-week period, and that would overwhelm our hospitals.
So that really needs to be the focus of public health work, is getting our hospitals ready, making sure we have enough respirators and things like that.
That's what the White House says.
There you go. Okay. Oh, interesting. Good. Larrie Garrett, Council on Foreign Relations, CFR.org. She's the Policy Global Health Program Senior Fellow, and check out her books, Betrayal of Trust and The Coming Plague. Thank you, Larrie.
Thank you.